So this video is about an anterior build-up, a technique that I've been using for a little while. It's not an ideal case because the model is slightly short of detail, but we're going to have a pick-up and a try-in. I'm using the GC initial kit and starting off with the in powders. It's basically a B3, B2 type of shade, and I'm using in 43 with a little in 46. I cover the whole of the coping with the in powder. And then I'm putting on my first dentine, which is B3, and then complete the rest of the build-up with a B2.5 dentine up to full contour. I always use the GC modelling liquid. I find water is not stable enough. Do a little bit of condensing and then go up to the cut back, which I think is the most important part of the whole process. I'm trying to take a flat, even cut back across the whole of the mid-facial and incisal area, cutting about halfway through the incisal edge. Then when I'm happy with the amount of reduction on the facial surface, I'm going to reduce the cut back again on the proximal surfaces, mesially and distally. And that's creating a sharp edge on both surfaces where the dentine finishes and the enamel starts. Small amount of reduction to the incisal edge. I've taken a shade and I know there isn't a lot of incisal translucency. And here I'm doing an additional reduction, which I think is very important, just around the super bulge area, to make a little bit more space so that the enamels can wrap into and around the proximal areas and create a nice low value enamel appearance. After any cut back, I like to brush out the damp brush just to create smooth transition lines. Now I'm doing an additional cut back, which is with a sharp blade at first, leaving a little horn on the mesial and distal proximal surfaces, and then taking out, as you can see, a reasonable amount of porcelain. And this technique is based around the idea of creating some change of value and opacity within the enamel, within the dentine. A little bit of extra reduction there. And I basically take some of my dentine powder and mix it with a fluorescent translucent powder, a CLF or one of the CTs. In this case it's CT23, which is an orangey translucent fluorescent. And then I use a lateral segmental type of build-up to rebuild this part of the dentine frame. The little horns that I left on the initial cutback act as a guide, and again smoothing out the transition lines. Now I've added a bit of FD91, which is a white fluorescent powder, to the dentine, and I'm just using that to highlight the proximal surfaces and a little on the incisal edge. When you see teeth that are denuded of enamel, you can see a lot of fluorescent effects in the dentine in these areas, and I like to add some more whiteness, some more opacity, as well as the translucence that I've already added. Little flecks along the incisal edge, or the incisal limit of the dentine. Now I'm rebuilding the frame with my enamels. I have in the blue pot there's a slightly opacified enamel, and in the black pot an enamel with slightly more translucence added to it. So I now have my frame, and I'm going to put the CLF layer on. The CLF is what they call the sclerose layer, the very translucent layer between the dentines and the enamels. I place this on the dentine when the dentine is very wet, as you can see there particularly, and this helps to give you a very thin floated layer and helps to keep that separation between the dentines and enamels. And I find that having the translucent layer here gives me a really nice base. The build-up's nice and flat, it's wet, and I have this translucent layer to modify the effects that I put on the top. So now I'm going to put my effects onto this layer. So I've already put on some Mamelon staining effects, which is in 43, with some of the Noritake stain Mamelon 1. As I said, I did take a shade from this patient, so I've got a reasonable idea where things are going to go. And here I'm just using a little bit of TMO5 with some Dove Grey to create some low value areas, some slight blue low value areas. The extra stain helps to add intensity, but the fact that it's on a translucent layer stops it looking too hard edged, too obvious. This is the bright enamel band, which is EO15 with a little EO17. Quite a common occurrence in the central incisors to have bright enamel, and that's a still of the finished item. You can see the lumpy appearance, so they stood out and off from the CLF. Now we're into the enamel. So I like to rebuild my contact areas, mesially and distally, with my more opacified enamel from the blue pot, and then I'll fill in between those two areas with a range of the two enamels that I have there, and possibly some other mixes as well, depending on the type of shade that I'm looking for. I don't do a lateral segmental as such, it's more of a patchwork fill in. Now a little bit of condensing and shaping with my tool, and I'm ready to do the platal surface. So I'm going to do a cut back right through to the mid portion of the incisal area, all the way across, so I can use the platal to help control the overall translucency or opacity. I'm going to start by backing up the coping and the build up above the coping with a little bit of in powder mixed with some of my Mamelon stain, and then some in powder, in 43s, in 46, just above the metal collar. And then now I've got some enamel mixed with some EO15, which is a whitish enamel designed for occlusions, and this is going to add a little bit of whiteness to the contact areas. When I look at teeth, I usually see a translucent band around the mesial and distal, but it's trapped within the tooth. The translucency doesn't escape to the margin of the tooth, and this optical effect is, I think, helped by using a little bit of extra whiteness onto your contact areas. Now I'm just adding a little bit of orange translucent, and then as we go towards the incisal edge, back to using my combination of enamels. And this area you can add more opacity or less opacity. You could use a blue translucent here if you wanted the tooth to be more translucent, for a lateral for instance. And then I'm finishing off by creating the palatal incisal edge, so trying to see my wear facet on the incisal edge so I can see that my build up is in exactly the right place. And then that's about done, and that'll be just dried slightly and then popped out of the model. Now all I have to do is add to the contacts, and I'm going to start by, on the contact itself towards the incisal edge, adding a little more of my mixture, which is my opaque enamel and EO15, and then as it comes down apically I would use the more translucent enamels. Last off, I'm going to build out my palatal contact, so apically it's coming out, so I can create as much of a long contact as possible. And I'm just using the EO15 with a little CT22 because this porcelain needs to be nice and opaque, and I can just stain the connection between the more translucent enamels and EO15 later. And there you go, nearly made a mistake. Back to my translucent enamel. The opaque enamel would turn just a little bit too white when it's right on top of the dentine there, so I just use the translucent enamels in those areas. and that's about ready for firing.